Welcome to the Private Practice Journeys podcast, where mental health professionals learn about the nuts and bolts of private practice by listening to the journeys of 4 therapists that have taken the plunge into private practice. And here's your host, Chris Quarto.
Hi, everyone. This is Chris Quarto, and welcome to Private Practice Journeys. If you've never listened to a Private Practice Journeys podcast episode, this is a great one to start with. We have Amanda Petrik, who's one of our 4 therapists who I'm interviewing on a monthly basis throughout 2017, paired up with Joe Sanok, who's an expert in private practice development. Joe is essentially doing an on-air consultation with Amanda a little bit later in the podcast episode. I start out by interviewing Joe first just to find out a little bit about him, what he does, what his philosophy is of helping people who want to go into private practice. And then I just basically hand over the reins to him and let him do his consultation gig with Amanda. So I think you'll really like this, and can't wait for you to hear it. So without further ado, here is Amanda and Joe. Hey everyone, welcome again to Private Practice Journeys. This is a special episode today because I have a guest expert on with me, Joe Sanok. And Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's really nice to have you on. And I also have one of our 4 therapists who I'm interviewing every month, Amanda Petrik. And Amanda, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
And Amanda, I just wanted to share with everybody the good news that you just had something special happen, and maybe you would like to announce it.
Yes, I just got married a couple weeks ago and literally just got back from my honeymoon a couple days ago.
Wonderful news.
Thank you.
There's nothing like starting off that marriage, and it's so exciting and everything to look forward to. And I hope you had a good time, and it was Jamaica, wasn't it?
Yes, we went to Jamaica. It was a blast. We already booked our trip next year.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. I'd love to make it down there sometime. So, well, Joe, I want to start off with you and just some of the audience, the Journey followers might not be familiar with you. I think many of them are. But let me start off by saying a little bit about my personal knowledge of you. Several years ago, I started listening to a podcast, and I really didn't know at that time, what I was listening to, why I was listening to it. I knew why I was listening to it, but there really weren't a lot of podcasts out there at the time to address private practice. And so I came across this podcast series called Practice of the Practice by Joe Sanok. And I listened to that episode, and I thought, wow, this is really cool, because I had never listened to a podcast before, to be quite honest. And for this to be the first one, I thought was really neat. But I think that I experienced what a lot of people experience when they listen to your podcast is I did a lot of binge listening. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah, you had a lot of podcasts. I think maybe you had about 15 or 20 out at the time. And so I listened to all those. And of course, you get to the last one and you think, oh, isn't there any more? And so you wait for the next week for the next one to come out. But you've done a really nice job and a real nice service, I think, for the community of therapists who are interested in going into private practice. So thank you for everything that you've done.
Oh, Chris, that means so much to me to hear that. And, it's like you put in this work, and those early days, it was every Sunday while my daughter was napping and my wife was napping because she was pregnant. Like I was upstairs recording podcasts in our extra bedroom. And it's like, you never know if people are even going to like resonate with it. But then, they start to connect, and it's inspiring to hear people's stories of kind of how they've taken the work I did and gone so much farther than I ever expected they'd do it. And now you're doing a podcast, which is crazy. Oh, yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. And it is. It's really neat to see how many podcasts are out there because, like I said, it was really only yours. There may have been only one other one out there at the time, but now they're all over the place. So it's really nice to see. So. Well, let's start off by talking a little bit about your journey, Joe, about how you got involved in private practice and how it evolved into practice of the practice and into your role as a consultant.
Yeah, so like many people after grad school, I got an agency job and then was working at community mental health and was working at a residential facility. So doing kind of the traditional route after grad school, making 30 grand a year, 40 grand a year. And my supervisor from my internship, he worked at a group practice part-time. And he connected me with the owner of that. Really, the goal was just for me to do a couple sessions a week to pay off student loans. And so I was a 1099 contractor there. I met with a friend of mine that was an accountant. He helped me file my PLLC so that I had some kind of legal incorporation there. And really, it was just I wanted to pay off student loans, and I'd get 65% of whatever I brought in.
Yeah.
And then in 2009, my wife, who she was doing her occupational therapy internship, we knew we wanted to come back to Traverse City, which is both of our hometown. It's a beautiful northern Michigan town. We moved back here, and I got a foster care supervisor job, and again launched a practice on the side, except all of the insurance panels were closed at the time. When I was down in Kalamazoo, I could get onto a handful of those. And at first I was just like, well, what am I going to do? And so I thought, well, I'll just see if this private pay thing will work. And it worked really well, and I didn't have to deal with insurance anymore.
Wonderful.
And then I think it was 2014, I brought on 2 other clinicians onto the practice. At this time, I still had a full-time job. And that year, I made more in my part-time side gig than I made in my full-time job.
Holy cow.
So my wife and I started asking some questions like, okay, if you're doing this 10 hours a week and can match it, like what would happen if you put in 30 or 40 hours a week? And so our daughter was born in 2015, 14, kind of late 2014. And I used the full Family Medical Leave Act to just kind of test this out. So went kind of part-time from my full-time job, and over 6 months tested it out, and had every month was the best month I had had ever. And then at the end of that, I talked to my boss, who was super supportive. She saw the writing on the wall. So left a couple years ago full-time to do this, and then also the consulting work that I do.
Well, yeah, and I'm kind of interested in that work, and say if you could say a little bit more about the consulting work that you started and have helped therapists develop their own private practices. How did you start doing that? Why did you start doing that, and where is the interest there?
Yeah, I remember I was always interested in I wouldn't say always. When I started my private practice, I got more interested in business books and just reading things that I never had learned in grad school. So books like Guerrilla Marketing, The One Thing, a lot of these kind of business basic books. I just found them to be really helpful. And then in 2012, I launched practiceofthepractice.com, really with the goal of just sharing what I was learning. So I'd read this business book, I'd share what I learned. I didn't see myself at all as an expert or a consultant or someone that knew anything. I was a co-learner with people that were learning with me. But then what started to happen is I started to pick up from those business books and business podcasts things that could kind of fast forward other people's progress. And so in 2013, that's when I launched the Practice of the Practice podcast. I had noticed that the only other counseling podcast was the American Counseling Association, and they had been stagnant for 6 months. So right away, I went from not having a podcast to having the #1 podcast because there weren't any others. Which is actually a strategy from Guerrilla Marketing, where they talk about, in the tire industry, for example, people would just make their tires just a little bit bigger so they could say the longest lasting tires, and to find these markets where you can really just kind of right away be #1. And so I did that and really kind of doubled down on podcasting. And that's really what I think helped build an audience. We're up to 50,000 downloads a month, have, a growing list of people that are just a great community. And then over time, just listening to my consulting clients, what were they looking for? So they were looking for virtual assistants. So I hired someone that I could outsource as a virtual assistant. People wanted images for their blogs that looked beautiful, and they didn't, want to be the one that did it. And so I hired a assistant that I can outsource to do that. And so just over time, listening to your audience rather than saying, what do I want to create, and then trying to sell it, it's a lot easier for me to just say, well, what are the pains that people are dealing with, and do I have ideas that I can help solve those pains?
Yeah. And I think, that was a good description of your podcast, because as I remember listening to those myself a few years ago, I do remember that it had that flavor of you were actually learning a lot of this stuff, and that's what the podcast series was about, really. You were just kind of sharing what you were learning. And it was sort of like, let's learn with Joe type of thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I considered it anyway. And it was a really neat thing because we could all learn with you together. And it was a developmental process. And it was a really cool thing. And it was really neat to see what was happening as the podcast series went on, because I had noticed that you were starting to make a shift from being the private practitioner and developing your private practice to more into the consultant area. I noticed that shift a little while ago. So it's sort of like you're doing that in that way again. And so I want you to talk a little bit about just your philosophy and your approach to helping therapists who want to go into private practice, and how is it that you go about working with them, Joe?
Yeah, so the first thing I really try to help people discover is which of the 3 phases of private practice they're in. Kind of over time, I've noticed that there's some very kind of clear phases that people go through. And the first one's the startup phase. So that's usually $0 to $50,000 gross. The next phase is the growth phase. So that's $50,000 to $100,000 gross. And then over $100,000 is the scaling phase. And each one of those 3 phases really has specific things that you want to be doing there that's very different from the other phases. So the startup phase, for example, I mean, really what you're trying to do is attract your ideal client. And you want to get your perfect client coming in. You want to be very clear about that. And you want to just be hustling and bootstrapping and keeping your risk and your costs low.
All right.
Unless you have, some huge financial backer that's going to back you, most people are going to have to hustle quite a bit during that startup phase. So that sweat equity is going to be your biggest asset because you're not as full and as busy as you want to be. And so then once you hit that 50 grand a year mark, that's really where we start to move into that growth phase.
Right.
And the big focus there is you want to be looking at how do I expand beyond just my own time while keeping kind of a bit of that bootstrapping mentality. So it might be that you start to outsource some things such as your phone calls and your intake scheduling, maybe a little bit of your web design, adding a clinician or two. And that's usually going to bump you up to that $100,000 mark. And then when you're at that scaling phase, really everything that got you there, you have to do the opposite. Because the bootstrapping, the you doing everything, wearing every hat for your practice, that's not the thing that gets you from 100 to 500. You've got to, add other people in 1099s or W-2s. You have to really ask yourself, why am I, Chris, spending time on this when I could be outsourcing it for $15 an hour?
Sure.
I could be sitting in a session, or I could be hiring a bunch of other people to be sitting in sessions so that I can scale well beyond myself so that if I go on vacation for a week, I keep making money. And so each of those things, I think, helping people understand where they're at, understanding their focus of the exact thing that they need to do next, while also adding in the big why of why'd you go into counseling? I want to help kids in foster care to transition into adulthood. Or, my sister had an eating disorder and I wanted to really make an impact on that. So throughout it all, it's not just about the money and kind of the income, but it's that influence and impact on the world as well.
Right.
Because that's why we went into counseling, to help people in one way or another. And if we lose that just to make money, then you're just making money like everybody else, rather than saying, I'm going to be a world changer through this process.
Right. Your description of that is similar to how I was describing your podcast, in that you're kind of describing this as a developmental process for therapists as well, in terms of these phases that they go through in private practice development, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think that this would be a good time actually to bring Amanda into the mix. And what I wanted you to do, Joe, is just really just kind of take it from here and just kind of interact with Amanda as you would one of your consulting clients. And I might jump in every now and then, but I think it'd be really neat for the Journey followers to listen to an on-air consultation. So I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Sounds great. Well, Amanda, I'm going to approach this like I do all of my pre-consulting calls. So people that, say, hey, I'm interested in doing consulting with you. The approach I take with that is I want to hear about your practice. I want to tell you kind of where to spend your time, where to spend your money so that you can move forward faster. So on the consulting calls, it may be at the end that I tell people, hey, I think we should work together, or hey, go listen to these podcasts. I'm obviously not going to try to sell you on my consulting today. And then from there, we'll kind of move into some practical bullet points to use your time best moving forward. So why don't we just start with, tell me a little bit about your practice and where you're at.
Okay, so I went full-time this past January. I was doing a part-time practice for the last couple years, but like your experience, I was making more in like that 10 hours a week doing part-time than I was doing my full-time practice or my full-time job. So went full-time this January, and I don't know if I just had it easy or I mean, like I binge listened to your podcast and everyone out there and marketed like crazy. So I've been scheduling over 30 clients a week, knowing that a few will no-show, reschedule. So maybe I'll have 25, because I was wanting about 25 clients a week. And so maybe 28 or so will show up. And of course, there's some week that more cancel than others, but so far, so good. I usually get a few calls, emails every day for new clients. I've already decided to get rid of a few insurance companies that I don't feel like reimburse quite what I'm wanting. And so I'm heading to only Blue Cross Blue Shield, have a few self-pay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Right now, what's the ratio of insurance versus self-pay out of that 30?
Oh gosh, I only have, out of all my clients, a couple self-pay. And okay. I've talked to other colleagues in my area, and my husband he has a part-time private practice, because I was like, someday do I want to do all private pay? And we're not sure in our community if that's a possibility. Just we don't have as high a functioning kind of population. So who knows if that's a possibility. But right now, Blue Cross reimburses my full rate. So I'm okay with that.
I mean, if they're going to reimburse, yeah. And what is your full rate?
I do $150 an hour.
Okay.
And so
an hour or per 45 minutes? Is that a clinical hour or 45 minute?
Oh yeah,
hour?
for a 60-minute.
Okay. So that's great that Blue Cross is reimbursing that. In a lot of states, that's not the case.
I should say they reimburse like $146. So
yeah, close enough. We'll take it.
Right, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, so really right away I'm thinking you're definitely not in the startup phase. You're not building that infrastructure. There may be things that we'd want to look at to see what you need to go back and clean up a little bit, but 30 clients a week getting 150 per session, like you're definitely in that growth phase. And so when I think about you're newly married, I imagine that, you don't want to spend 30 hours a week in your practice. And if you do want to spend 30 hours a week, the ability to scale with just you, we'd want to start looking at how do we optimize your time best. So tell me more about where are you spending time outside of that 30 hours a week in regards to your practice?
As far as not doing just counseling, like what? Yeah,
are you spending it on your website? Are you spending it on answering phone calls? Are you what are you spending that's non-billable time?
So, every day I have to return all the emails and phone calls. I changed. In February, I started doing all my own billing because I was looking at financials, and gosh, I was spending over $600 on a billing service. And with my EHR, I'm like, dude, I can do this myself. Just a click of a button. It was
so that's $600 a month you were spending?
Yes, I was paying like $6 a claim for somebody to do billing. And I'm the kind of person who's like, I can do this. That's so simple. And so I started doing it myself, but that takes literally no time whatsoever. At the end of the session, I just click a button. My website, I'm sure it could use more work, but I do that myself. I do it all right now. My marketing, I meet with therapists, physicians, people around town. I try to do that. I send out letters. So that's where my extra time goes.
Super helpful. So I would say we want to start to ask ourselves, what are the things that only Amanda can do? Like only you can show up and be a counselor, right? Like, I mean, in regards to your clients, like you're not going to outsource someone else coming in and taking over your clients. But emails, phone calls, even that clicking of the billing, your website, your marketing, for every hour you spend on that, that's $150 that you've basically lost. And so I'd say one of the low-hanging fruits for you is to look for some sort of virtual assistant that you can train or that you can hire so that they can be looking at your emails, they can be working on the phones, they can do the scheduling while you're in sessions. Because we know that a lot of that flow of getting new clients, people will just go through the list and they'll call everybody on the list, the person that picks up. And so you probably are losing a lot of money by not paying someone $15 an hour to answer your phones. In most situations, having an assistant or virtual assistant answer your phones is cost positive, meaning that the amount you pay them, you make up more than enough in revenue increase. And so especially if you're looking at scaling and adding clinicians to your practice, which we'll talk about in a minute, that's going to really help you. The other side is having that person look at your email and work through it and create kind of some decision-making tree around what do you need to look at and what can they respond to. Because the worst thing is you have this full day, you've billed a bunch, and then you have 50 emails you got to go through. It's just emotionally so taxing. And so that was one of the best things that I did. Probably 3 months ago, I hired Emily to start working through my emails and helped her with that. So we'll talk about what you want to do to make sure that you stay within HIPAA compliance, what you want to do to stay in regards to ethics, and how you want to do that. And then website, I went through your website and I have a couple ideas of really low-hanging fruit to help you get more clients right away, and even those private pay clients to clean things up.
That'd be great.
So in regards to outsourcing email and phone calls, what phone system do you use right now for when people call in?
Oh, it's literally, I have a separate cell phone and they call me and I return all of my voicemails.
Okay. So it might be worth it to find a phone system where it's not just a separate phone. You can do systems like Grasshopper or other ones that you want to look at in regards to how HIPAA compliant they are and in regards to your own state ethics. But so, for example, like Grasshopper or something like that, you keep your regular phone number, but they give you a separate phone number line that goes to your phone, but it goes to a separate voicemail. And so it's like it uses your phone, but then no one has your number. But what's great about it is you can have that incoming call ring you if you want to make sure that you can sometimes take it when you're available, or you can have it ring any phone in the nation. So for years, my assistant was in Texas and I'm in Michigan, and she would answer, "Hello, mental wellness counseling." Like the clients had no idea that she was down in Houston and we were up here. And so that's a really, I think we'd want to look at first looking at what kind of phone system you'd want. Then we'd want to look at tracking. How do you answer things? So when someone says, "Are you taking new clients?" What do you say? So just starting to document some of that so that these people could have a script that they're basically reading from. Do you take Priority Health? No, Amanda just does Blue Cross Blue Shield, but she's considered out-of-network benefits, and then blah, 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 all of that. So the more that you can right now start keeping track of what you say so that someone else could just take over and basically read from a script, that's going to make that handoff even better. Also, do you have a Mac or a PC for your computer?
A Mac.
Okay, so on Mac, there's an application called QuickTime that's on there. If you click in QuickTime, you can do screen recordings. So for example, if you're using any sort of software to schedule clients in, you can just start to record how you do that step by step so that you have a video of it that you then, obviously with no confidential information, you put it onto a private YouTube channel that then you can have any assistant go in and know exactly what to do. Because the big thing we want to ask yourself now is, why is Amanda doing this? You know that you could take on 2 more clients, at $300, you'd get per those 2 clients. That's an extra $1,200 a month when you could probably hire an assistant for $500 a month. So you're going to come out way ahead in that situation.
And Joe, I just want to jump in here really quickly. And I think that's probably one of the things that newer therapists are going to question is I can't afford to hire a virtual assistant. I can't afford to do the Grasshopper or these other things. And from what you're saying here, the time that they would have to spend providing more services would really cover the cost of those things. So it's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, so like Grasshopper, so if you go to practiceofthepractice.com/Grasshopper, you can get it for $9 a month, and then you pay per minute that you use. And it's like, for our whole group practice, I pay the $9 a month, and then they bill you when you hit $100. I think every quarter I probably pay $100. So that's more expensive than the cell phone that right now Amanda has. And so I think that's a great question, because there are things that right away you probably don't want to have. If you can't fill up your time, maybe having a virtual assistant right away when you're at that 0 to 20,000, that may not be a great use of your time. But it may be worth it to have someone that once a day checks your voicemail for you at 9 a.m. and noon. They may not be on call where they're answering every phone call, but they're calling people back once a day. And if there's nothing there, you don't pay them other than for that 5 minutes. So I'm definitely not a fan of having a receptionist just kind of sit in your front lobby and get paid for being on their own Facebook. I'm really a fan of kind of paying for what you're using. And so having a contract with someone that, you're going to keep track of your minutes. And so if you're on the phone for 10 minutes, then, I'm going to pay you this much per hour. So maybe a higher rate for a receptionist or an admin person. So maybe $15 an hour, whereas most people in your town get 11, but I'm only going to pay for what I use. And so you then are, as you grow, your bill goes up. And as you have fewer phone calls, your bill doesn't go up.
Right.
Makes sense. Is there
The
a certain
very
virtual
first time.
assist-
Oh, go ahead.
Is there a certain virtual assistant or company you know of or that you use?
Yeah, so I actually got sick of being let down by virtual assistant companies. So I actually hired someone, and now I just outsource Emily to other clinicians. So if you want to interview Emily, you're welcome to reach out to me after the call. But honestly, like you can just put out on Facebook, hey, my practice is growing. I'm looking for someone that's a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad that wants a flexible schedule. We're going to start at $15 an hour, willing to grow with the role. Assuming that you have, your all of your HIPAA paperwork in line, that, all of that you want to make sure they understand confidentiality, understand, your neighbor may call Amanda and you can't, say, hey, I answered your phone the other day. So really just, that's how I found my very first virtual assistant is I just put on Facebook and said, hey, tag anyone that you think will be interested and I'll walk them through the process. And then I just had a Google form for them to apply that I made that had some kind of basic questions about what were they into. And then I did Skype interviews with the top 5. And then from there, I had a pretty good sense as to who was competent enough to take it over.
Okay, thank you.
So if you're willing to put in the time, it's not hard to find a virtual assistant.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would say I would start there with finding someone that can start to take more off of your plate. And then the other side of it is if you're at 30 sessions, like you're pretty maxed out in regards to how many more new sessions. So
I don't really want to schedule more than that.
Right. Tell me about how you feel about adding clinicians to your practice.
At first, I never wanted to. But then again, I remember the day that I never thought I'd go into private practice. So now I'm kind of like, I just don't know about what it takes as far as paperwork and insurance and credentialing. So the unknown. So
absolutely. Okay. So first tell me about your office setup. Do you have just your office and a lobby? Is there what's the office setup that you're renting?
So it's a big office plaza, tons of different suites. And so my specific one has a couple different suites inside a little one. So there's a potential more people could be added, or we can move around to a different place in the building that has more space.
Okay, so that's good. And then when you think about even just your own office, I'm a big fan of optimizing the current office before you upgrade on kind of the hunch that we're going to make more money. I'd rather you actually making the money. So if you just look at your own schedule and try to make it as efficient as possible where you don't have big couple hour gaps in it, you'll be able to notice, okay, I'm never here on Monday nights or Tuesday nights or Wednesday nights. So I want to look for someone that's available on Monday nights, Tuesday nights, and Wednesday nights. So maybe it's a side business for them that they want to pay off student loan debt, or it's someone that is on a Saturday. So for example, I have a clinician, Sarah, who works at Community Mental Health. She's not allowed to practice during the week outside of there just in case there's an emergency, but she can on Saturdays. So she just comes in every Saturday from like 9 till 1, sees 5 clients, and then she makes a little bit of extra money every month for her family. And then we're optimizing this space as much as we can. So I would say start looking for people that might be interested in doing some evenings, sometimes that you're not using the office. The other thing that does is it forces you to have very clear boundaries around your time. And so if someone's like, sorry, I can't do that. Can you do Monday night? You're like, no, I'm sorry. I have another clinician that uses Monday nights. So it forces you to then be able to have some better boundaries in regards to your own lifestyle that you want to live.
Okay. Do you know much, because like I said, the scary part for me is how much work goes into adding people to practice, making it a group.
Yeah. So it's not, I've done it. I've helped a bunch of people do it. I have a group practice and do it, every time I want to add a clinician. So let me just kind of walk you through what that looks like. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, do you want to have W-2 employees, which means that you're paying taxes, you're adding to unemployment, all those state regulations is it Kansas that you're at?
Oh, yes, Kansas.
Yeah, Kansas. And so do you want that, or do you want a 1099 contractor? So the big difference is control. So a W-2, and I'm not an accountant or an attorney, so ask your own attorney for the business advice. My attorney makes me always say that, so even in the consulting calls. But you'll want to check in with a business attorney or start to look around to see what the employment law is. So there's states such as California that are very much against 1099s. You have to be super careful in California if you're going to have a 1099. because they want most people to be W-2s. You can do it, but you really want to work with a business attorney on that. Whereas in other states like Michigan, they don't seem to care quite as much about W-2 versus 1099, so long as you're following all the 1099 kind of criteria. So I said that it's control. So you have W-2, they're an employee. You're basically able to say, I want you to dress this way. You can't wear flip-flops. Here's our policy. Whereas a 1099, you want to view it kind of like you would the person that mows your lawn. You're not going to say, when you're on my property, you got to wear a blue shirt and you've got to wear this kind of boots and you have to be here at 9 a.m. or you can't mow my lawn. No, they come, they mow your lawn, they wear whatever they want to wear, and then they leave and you pay them. It's kind of the same mindset of the counselors that are 1099s, that it's almost like a hairdresser where they're sort of renting the office. You're getting a percentage of that. You're doing the marketing, the website, the email. You may have, your virtual assistant do all the phone calls, and then you get a percentage of that. So like a very common model for that is that you would have 50% of like the first $1,000 that comes in, you get 50% of that. And then above that first $1,000, you get 35% of that. So for a lot of people, that kind of covers more than the cost, covers the time that they're doing it. And then we can talk about exactly how you would bring somebody on.
Okay.
So usually in my consulting, I do ask more questions than this and let you talk a little bit more. But I wanted to make sure you got kind of all the bullet points for you.
I know. That's why I'm taking notes. That's why I'm sitting here writing all this down.
So in my consulting, we use a project management system called Trello. And so you would get an MP3 recording of this. And then I'd also be taking notes in Trello so that you wouldn't have to be writing crazily.
Joe, I'm kind of curious about when you do consulting with therapists, what do you find to be the primary challenges in that kind of a role as a consultant?
Challenges for me or challenges for my consulting clients?
Challenges after you provide them with your consultation advice. I guess more. Do you find that they don't carry out the advice, or that there are challenges in them actually following through with what you ask them or suggest for them to do? Say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So that used to be the case. At the end, it would be like, okay, Amanda, you've got your big checklist of everything to do now. And you're like, where do I start? But I actually switched it a couple of years ago where in Trello, if Amanda and I were working together, I would say, here's the one big thing that you need to get done between now and our next consulting session. So for Amanda, I would say it's probably starting to look into a virtual assistant. So whether that's interviewing my Emily, whether that's posting it on Facebook, whatever she decides, I would say that's the first thing she needs to do, because if she doesn't free up her time from what she's doing, she's going to burn out quickly. Yeah. And I don't want her to burn out. She has important work to do. And so that would be her one thing. If she gets nothing done between our consulting sessions, like that's the one big step forward. And then there's a list of her next things, and that's where we put everything else. And so next might be that she's going to start looking into different billing software, or she's going to look into upgrading her website, or she's going to look into bringing on a 1099 versus a W-2 in Kansas. So then once she's finished the virtual assistant thing, she'd move it to the completed column and then move the next thing over. And so that has totally changed how what kind of outcomes we have in consulting, because it's a lot more approachable when it's like, okay, the one thing I need to do is find a virtual assistant. Like that needs to be my focus when I have free time, and not worry about any of this other stuff. So I think that's the big thing, the big takeaway, not just for people that work with me, but to just say, what's your one thing you need to accomplish this week beyond just showing up for counseling?
How do you prioritize those things, Joe? Because you suggested a lot of things to Amanda, which sounded really good, and I think would help her out. But in terms of a starting point for Amanda, how would you prioritize that virtual assistant is the most important thing, that should be the first thing, as opposed to X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, so there's a couple factors that I take into account. For one, what's the low-hanging fruit in regards to giving Amanda time or giving Amanda money? And so for her right now, money's not as much of the issue, because she doesn't want to have 5 extra clients because she's going to be burned out. She'd rather hang out with her new husband. And so I know that she's valuing time above money. Now, if she was at 15 clients, for me, I'd say, no, we need to focus on getting you full, not focus as much on kind of the virtual assistant. So really that time and money are usually the low-hanging fruit that we can work on right away. and then looking at where that person's at. For Amanda, that's going to be time. So we want to give her as much time as possible. And how are we going to do that long term? First, we're going to have a virtual assistant that can basically be a replica of Amanda, answering the phone, scheduling, speaking on behalf of the practice, and then having people other than Amanda that the new clients can go to. So that's going to help with both the time and the money side. And so that's where I'd say let's put some time there. And then once that happens, then I'd say, well, where are we finding our clients? Well, there's a lot of things on her website that she could update, but she doesn't need to do that right now because she doesn't need new clients. So we don't want to put a bunch of time into the website because she doesn't want new clients right now. She wants more time.
Right.
Does that make sense? Kind of how we
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I like the low-hanging fruit idea because it really doesn't ensure, but makes it much more likely that they can experience success and experience that success more quickly. And I like that idea. And that might motivate them to do the other things that they need to do on the list. Yeah. So I really like that approach. Amanda,
I think that low-hanging fruit idea, so I get a lot of people that will reach out and say, hey, I have this big idea beyond my practice. There's a podcast I want to launch, a website, a keynote, whatever their big idea is. And I always start with, let's spend a couple sessions evaluating your practice for that low-hanging fruit. So we need to make sure that we're freeing up your time to do that big idea, because if you start working on this big idea, but you still have that 50 hours a week in your private practice, like that, you're not going to be able to put in the energy to that big idea. So we often will look at adding clinicians, optimizing their time so that they're working 20 hours a week, making the same amount of money, and then can put in that extra time into that big idea that they have.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Amanda, I wonder if you have any questions that you would like to ask Joe at this point.
Because I'm always looking at like how to do more, how to do better, how to increase salary. Like, I was kind of surprised within a few months. I was like, oh, I already reached my my goal for the first few years. Are there additional ways to almost give yourself a salary when you're self-employed? I mean, I don't want to see more clients, and I wasn't planning to go the private pay route. So I was like, what other avenues are there to, how do you give yourself an increase in salary in this business?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. So I think just that you're leaving other insurances, you have an opportunity to raise your rates overall, because there's going to be people that have insurance from other insurances that you'll be an out-of-network provider anyway. So by making that decision, you've already opened up the amount of private pay. So right now you're saying, I don't feel like I want to take anyone on, but say someone didn't have Blue Cross and they really wanted to see you. Like, what rate would you show up and feel really good about? Maybe it's $200 an hour. Maybe it's $250 an hour. Maybe it's $175. I would say you probably want to raise your rates overall if you're this full. So I would start there. And then I think the other big salary thing is adding those 1099s. And I'm saying 1099s because that's usually the better model if you can make it work, because there's less oversight. People just show up, they do the counseling, and then they go home and get paid. And so I'd say finding those people, interviewing them, getting coffee with them to see if they're a fit with the practice, onboarding them, so having them sign a contract, having them walk through kind of your approach, getting them on the website, and then getting them clients. That's kind of the quick flow of how you'd want that to go, and then get them scheduled in so that they can start seeing people sooner than later.
Do you think that there's, I kind of wonder about that, because I think that getting back to this whole idea of the developmental process, and Amanda's still kind of young therapist in terms of private practice, that is, and bringing on new therapists as 1099s or whatever seems like it could be an overwhelming thing for somebody who's just kind of starting into private practice. So what would you recommend to people in that situation to kind of help alleviate their fears, or to kind of help them along that developmental process that way?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to kind of their mentality in regards to how much they want to bootstrap versus bring somebody in. So talking to a local attorney, talking to a consultant, listening to a bunch of podcasts about how to add 1099s, reading blog posts on it. There's tons of free options out there. The downside is Amanda's super busy already. So is she going to put in that time? Or, if she knows that she's going to be able to bring somebody in really quickly, fill that person up, we'd want to look at the numbers. So if somebody is seeing, 10 clients a week at $100 a session and she's getting half of that, that's $500 a week or $2,000 a month that she's missing out on. So if she has, whether it's a consultant or an attorney that walks her through that, that's going to help her set up that structure a lot quicker than just, trying to bootstrap it. I think she's past that point of trying to do everything on her own, and really paying some money for that speed and that expertise is probably worth it for her. But it's a huge mindset shift, because to get where she's at now, she's had to bootstrap it, build her own website, build everything herself. Yeah. So it's that big shift that we see during that growth and scaling phase.
Right.
I think that's going to be the tough part, because I like doing everything on my own. I'm like, I don't trust anyone else to take over.
Yeah. I get it. I mean, like with my podcast, I did the podcast images for every episode up until probably 50 episodes ago. And I love it. I love art. I love design. I like everything about it. I love. But now that I have Sam doing all of that, I literally record the podcast, upload it, and then pass that link off to her, and she does everything else. So this thing that used to be a 4-hour process per episode now is a 45-minute process per episode, because I just have to show up and record it. And so I'm giving up, for that satisfaction of art, that 3 hours I could be working on something bigger for the practice or for practice of the practice. And so, yeah, you do give it up, but then it's like, hey, I can go take an art class on a Wednesday night instead to fill that up.
Amanda, do you have any other questions for Joe?
I was the only one. I was kind of curious what other people's schedules look like from the time they get to work, when they leave, because I think I've told you, Chris, before, like, I'm still used to the community mental health center way. Oh, yeah. Where, I schedule 10, 11. I take a lunch break, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what I do. And I count on like a cancellation, and that's when I do my billing, I check voicemails. And I'm kind of like, is that what everybody else does? Or do they actually schedule a couple hours for paperwork?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's a big shift, because when you're in an agency or CMH, it's somebody else determines what your lifestyle should be. And so if you aren't working 40 hours a week, sometimes you can feel super guilty. Like, I remember I was going to the YMCA at like 10 a.m. for a while, and I was like, does everyone think I'm unemployed? Like, I just think all these, I'm not unemployed, really. Like, I'm making enough money to be here in the middle of the day. And so there's all these weird things that come up for us. And I think I would start with, what do you want your schedule to be? Like, do you like being there at 8 a.m. or would you rather sleep in a little bit, especially because you don't have kids yet? Like, savor that time.
Right.
Do you like working back to back, or would you rather have 4 sessions a day and then work on, your website or blog for a bit? I think what's tough about it is that it's entirely up to you. It's just, are you getting the outcomes financially in regards to your impact on the world that you want to get? So for me, a number of years ago, I started with an experiment of taking Fridays off to just see if I could keep my money up and have a 3-day weekend. And then that experiment turned into a lifestyle, where then the next summer I decided I was going to take Mondays off too. And that experiment turned into a lifestyle. So now I only work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But when I work, I am full tilt. Like, I don't want to chit chat. I want to get things done. I want to have results from that, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And so every little micro moment, I'm squeezing something extra in. I'm doing yesterday I did a Facebook Live 5 minutes before a mastermind group was supposed to start. And it's like, you get it in there, because I'd rather work for 3 days as hard as I can and then have a 4-day weekend with my daughters and my wife. But that works for me. Other people would say, I don't want to sprint that hard. And so I would say, look at the lifestyle that you want and then start to kind of reverse engineer it, and ask yourself, what do you need to do more of that lifestyle?
I think right now, at first when I started, I was working every day, every evening, every weekend, because my part-time was weekends, evenings. And slowly each month I've cut back something. I got rid of weekends right away. I've gotten rid of my evenings. And now I sleep in, I don't come in till 10. I think every month I've cut back a little more. But when I'm here, I don't stop. I take every minute I'm doing something. Who knows, but in a few years, I'm probably going to have Monday and Fridays off.
Well, and I think part of it, that's awesome that every month you're kind of moving in that direction. One thing that I've found that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with is they may have the weekend off, but their brain is still on business and ideas, and they're talking to their spouse or partner about, oh, I could do this or I could do this. I think it's really important to kind of say, when is Amanda in business mode and when is Amanda not, and to have agreements with the people you love that, all right, today is a non-business day. Like no blog talk, no podcast talk. Like I don't want to hear about Joe and his podcast. Like it's just we're gonna go hiking and we're gonna go for a walk or we're gonna do whatever and have friends over. And that to me, I think then builds that habit that's sustainable, so that you're not always in business mode.
We're working on that one. We won't talk about, especially since he's in the field, we won't talk about work at home. But my brain doesn't shut off yet.
It's hard.
It's a struggle.
It's hard to find that balance at times.
Yes.
Yeah, especially I think when you're first starting off and you want everything to be successful and you're working hard at that, and that's totally
just so excited.
Oh, sure.
No, I hear you. Like I still feel that way because I absolutely love what I'm doing. When I get a new consulting client, I tell Christina about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this person's so cool. I can't wait to help them grow. And like, part of that's okay. And then there's a point when she's like, okay, can you help with diapers, please? And that's fine too. That's part of the rhythm of our life right now. And, but that's just a great sign that you love what you're doing and you're kind of in that flow of what you should be doing, that you're so excited about it that, Mondays don't feel like Mondays because you're like, I get to go do what I absolutely love.
Oh, yeah. Is it bad coming back from the honeymoon? I was excited to come back to work.
No, not at all. That's a good sign. That's a great sign.
Well, listen, we've come to the end of our podcast episode, and I want to thank you, Joe, for coming on today, taking out a little bit of your time to spend here. And I wanted to put in a plug for something very special that you have coming up, I think, this summer called Slowdown School. And so maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's a conference that I'm doing this summer for counselors that are growing and thriving. Actually, Amanda's sort of like that perfect fit for this type of thing. And so it's a 1-week conference where for 2 days we're slowing down, we're hiking, we're going to have campfires. And then the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of it, we're going to run full tilt towards your business with business planning. But we're also going to be going wine tasting. We're going to be having campfires on the beach. We're going to look at the stars. And Kelly Higdon from Zinni.me, who's one of the top consultants for private practitioners, she's going to be joining me as well. Also, early birds get a video from Cupola Media, which is a company based out of Los Angeles that does amazing therapist videos. We have a bunch of really cool sponsors that are coming on. So yeah, we're slowing down, but then we're going to really speed things up for people in private practice. So slowdownschool.com.
Yeah, sounds like a great opportunity. And I encourage all therapists to check that out. It's I think that you've done a couple of similar events in the past, and I've heard really good reviews on that. Amanda, if anybody wants to get a hold of you for any reason, how could they do that?
My website, which is just amandalcpc.com, has all my contact information from there.
Wonderful. And Joe, if anybody wants to get a hold of you for consulting purposes or any other reason, how could they get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way is to just go to practiceofthepractice.com/consulting.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks both of you for coming on, and have a great rest of the day.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, what did you think of that? Wasn't that great stuff? I really appreciate Joe coming on the podcast today and sharing his expertise. I really value people who have been there, done that, and are so willing to share their knowledge with us who are either at the beginning phases of private practice or like myself. I've been in this for several years, but listening and hearing some things that I could do to bring my practice to the next level. So it's really nice that he's done that. And I think one of the real important things that I got out of this are those 3 phases of private practice development. I mean, a lot of times therapists who want to do the private practice place so much emphasis on starting it and what do I have to do to start it. And you hear a lot of podcasts and there's a lot of information out there about how to do it, but not necessarily how to take it to the next level. And Joe did that. And in fact, it's so applicable to Amanda because she's seeing 30 clients a week. She's already met her first year goal of seeing this many clients per week. So she had a good question. Now, where do I go? Where do I take this? And so Joe had a real nice way that he spelled this out about the startup phase and the growth phase and the scaling phase, just to kind of give you an overview of the whole practice development. So it was nice that he was able to provide Amanda with that sort of information to help her. Well, if you like the show notes for today's episode, please visit my website, chrisquarto.com, CHRISQUARTO.com, and you'll be able to find Joe's website information there, including the Slowdown School, which he had talked about in the podcast today. And you'll also be able to find Amanda's website information there as well. Until next time, have a great rest of the week.